Orthonofi Fitness here. For years, lifters have repeated the idea that piling on ever greater numbers of sets automatically builds more muscle. But recent physiological evidence contradicts that belief. When you first pick up a barbell, you can only recruit a fraction of your highest threshold motor units. Early sessions therefore load fibers that have never faced real mechanical tension, and those fibers enlarge quickly because the stimulus is brand new and recovery is almost effortless. As weeks turn into months, recruitment capacity improves, letting you access the largest fibers. But those same fibers are the most easily damaged and slowest to recover. Mechanical tension, not the sheer count of sets, is what initiates the cascade of signaling that turns protein synthesis machinery on. Laboratory measurements published in 2024 showed that a single working set taken to true muscular failure raised myofibrillar protein synthesis for up to 36 hours in experienced athletes, whereas multiple sets performed far from failure barely moved the needle. The key distinction is that fatigue reduces motor unit recruitment with every additional set. By the third or fourth set in a short rest sequence, contraction speed declines and the nervous system cannot re-recruit the biggest fibers, so further volume mostly batters already fatigued units without stimulating new ones. A wide sample meta-analysis of controlled trials released in February 2025 confirmed a plateau pattern. When rests were 2 minutes or longer, 6 hard sets for a muscle in one session produced the same hypertrophy as 12, and gains for the week leveled off near 10 productive sets, regardless of how those sets were spread across workouts. Additional work simply increased markers of muscle damage and delayed strength recovery. The data also clarified that trained participants reached the plateau with even fewer sets than novices because their neural efficiency lets them impose high tension on target fibers earlier in the session. Continuous growth therefore relies on two principles. First, each set that counts must be close enough to failure to slow bar speed markedly, ensuring high threshold units are engaged. Second, once those fibers are fatigued, adding more sets in the same workout becomes counterproductive for lifters beyond the beginner stage. Practical application demands enough rest between demanding sets. Research in late 2024 documented that 2 to 3 minute intervals restored motor unit firing rates and allowed subsequent sets to regain effective tension, whereas 60-second breaks required twice the total sets for the same anabolic signal. The implication is straightforward. As training experience increases, quality overrides quantity. A modest number of well-executed near-failure sets with adequate rest stimulates maximal protein synthesis while avoiding excessive structural damage. Larger weekly set counts can still work for novices whose fiber recruitment ceiling is low, but once the nervous system matures, the strategy must shift toward precision rather than accumulation. Emerging data also clarify how often those stimulating sets should be performed. A multi-center trial published in March 2025 compared equal weekly set volume split across 2 versus 4 sessions in resistance-trained adults. Muscle thickness ultrasound showed identical quadriceps growth in both schedules after 8 weeks, but the group that spread sets over 4 days reported lower perceived exertion and registered 28% less creatine kinase elevation, indicating faster structural recovery. The practical takeaway is that frequency mainly serves recovery management. Once weekly effective set count is fixed, distributing those sets over more sessions does not add extra hypertrophy, yet it can reduce soreness and allow higher load quality. Intensity still matters independently of volume. A systematic review from late 2024 found that sets completed with loads below 30% of 1 rep max generated only half the myofibrillar protein synthesis response of heavier work, even when sets were taken to momentary failure. The implication is that chasing very high volume with very light loads is inefficient for size. Conversely, the same review confirmed that loads between 60% and 85% of 1 rep max produce comparable hypertrophy as long as sets approach failure, suggesting a broad but not unlimited intensity window. Within that window, the speed of the final repetitions, slowed bar velocity, remains the best field indicator that sufficient mechanical tension has been reached. Rest interval research continues to revise earlier assumptions. A Bayesian meta-analysis released in July 2024 showed a small but consistent hypertrophy advantage for rest periods longer than 60 seconds, primarily because longer rests enabled heavier subsequent sets and preserved high-threshold motor unit recruitment across the workout. Notably, the analysis did not find any extra benefit to resting more than 3 minutes. Beyond that point, total session time increased without further gains. Therefore, targeting 2-minute recoveries between near-failure sets strikes an effective balance between mechanical tension and workout density. Volume researchers now quantify productive work as effective repetitions, those last reps in a set where contraction velocity drops sharply. A 2025 dose-response meta-regression estimated that around 40 effective repetitions per muscle per week is the point at which additional effort yields diminishing returns for experienced lifters. With typical loading, that equates to 8 to 10 near-failure sets over 7 days. Pushing far past that number inflates biochemical stress markers and joint inflammation without adding additional protein synthetic activity. Novices tolerate and often need somewhat more total sets because their early repetitions recruit fewer high threshold units, but the ceiling still appears lower than old bro science recommendations. The same body of evidence also dispels the idea that accumulated fatigue is a growth driver. Muscle biopsy work published in November 2024 demonstrated that eccentric damage markers and inflammatory cytokines peaked after high volume sessions, but bore no correlation with long-term fiber area increases. Instead, sustained growth aligned with repeated elevations in mechanistic target of rapamycin signaling, which plateaued once motor unit recruitment dropped. In practice, this means reducing volume once performance quality declines during a phase rather than chasing soreness as validation. Careful load progression remains essential. Researchers tracking trained participants for 12 consecutive months reported in January 2025 that maintaining or slightly increasing absolute load from mesocycle to mesocycle while holding weekly effective set counts steady predicted twice the hypertrophy compared with subjects who added more sets but failed to increase load. The nervous system adapts to recruit existing fibers more efficiently. Without incremental tension, additional volume simply rehearses a stimulus the muscle has already adapted to. Practical application in the gym should therefore revolve around repeatable, high-quality execution rather than an ever-growing tally of sets. Programming that keeps weekly effective set count stable while rotating exercises with overlapping force vectors has been shown in a 2025 randomized trial to maintain hypertrophy for 12 weeks without measurable connective tissue overload. The rationale is simple. Changing the joint angle or range of motion restarts the novel stimulus effect for specific regional fiber groups, allowing growth without forcing total volume upward. For example, a block that emphasized a low incline press in place of a flat press restored pectoral satellite cell activation that had stagnated during the prior mesocycle, even though the weekly number of near failure sets was held constant. Recovery capacity ultimately caps how many of those productive sets can be repeated. Objective data now outpace subjective soreness as a guide. Portable tensiomyography measurements collected in a 3-month field study with resistance-trained volunteers demonstrated that a 40% drop in contractile velocity from baseline predicted the day when motor unit recruitment fell off in subsequent sessions. When athletes ignored that marker and added sets anyway, hypertrophy gains flattened despite larger time investment. Incorporating a flexible cap, stopping a session when repeated bout contractile velocity falls past that threshold proved more reliable than rigid volume prescriptions and prevented excessive accumulation of connective tissue crosslinks measured by collagen-type breakdown products. Nutritional strategies refine these principles but do not replace them. Protein distribution matters most when mechanical tension has already been achieved. Investigators in late 2024 reported that 30-gram leucine-rich feedings, spaced roughly 4 hours apart, kept muscle protein synthesis elevated across a 24-hour cycle when paired with near-failure sessions. Doubling the protein dose or increasing meal frequency did not improve net nitrogen balance unless the workout itself reached the effective tension threshold. Similarly, topical discussions about advanced supplementation, creatine ethyl ester, beta-ecdysterone, hydrogen-rich water showed negligible additive effect once training already optimized effective repetitions, proving again that the stimulus at the fiber level governs the ceiling for growth. Deload timing can be individualized with bloodborne markers now inexpensive enough for routine checks. Elevated serum urea and persistent C-reactive protein above low-grade baseline correlated with decrements in muscle thickness over 12-week cycles of progressive tension, indicating systemic fatigue preceding visible performance drops. In practice, scheduling a 7-day reduction to 50% of normal volume whenever those markers remain elevated for 2 consecutive readings preserved growth trajectories without sacrificing strength gains, supporting the concept that strategic reduction rather than constant escalation sustains maximal fiber adaptation over long stretches. Advanced lifters often ask whether adding metabolite-driven work after the heavy sets might push past the plateau. Evidence from a January 2025 crossover trial suggests otherwise. Inserting low-load blood flow restricted sets after primary near-failure work increased acute swelling but failed to increase satellite cell content or fiber cross-section compared with a control block that simply concluded the session after the final effective set. Swelling subsided within hours, while serum damage markers remained higher for 48 hours, indicating a cost without measurable benefit. Taken together, contemporary research converges on one conclusion. Muscular adaptation hinges on enough mechanical tension to recruit and fatigue the highest threshold motor units, delivered through a sustainable number of near-failure sets, supported by sufficient recovery and modest progressive overload. Once that condition is met, multiplying sets beyond the plateau does not amplify growth and soon undermines it by dulling recruitment on subsequent days. Precision beats accumulation. Track bar speed, rest long enough to restore firing rates, hold weekly effective set count within the proven range, and adjust only when real recovery metrics confirm you can handle more. Volume never was king, and the body's own physiology continues to show why.